The Constitutional Convention of 1787. Government officials realized after Shays' Rebellion that a change was needed, so they called the Second Constitutional Convention. Delegates from the states were called to a convention in Philadelphia in 1787. 12 of the 13 states sent delegates. Only Rhode Island did not attend. Delegates had a choice to make: fix the Articles of Confederation or write a new constitution or a new plan for government. The delegates decided to write a new plan for government. The challenge was to create a strong national government, but one that would still preserve the power for the states. The Constitutional Convention delegates. Some of the delegates at the Constitutional Convention included James Madison, is known as the father of the Constitution because of the detailed notes he wrote during the convention and because he wrote much of the new Constitution. George Washington came out of retirement for the convention. Due to his leadership during the American Revolution, he was chosen to be president of the convention. Benjamin Franklin was the oldest delegate at age 81. He added his experience and sense of humor to the discussions and often helped keep arguments from getting out of control. And Alexander Hamilton was a supporter of a strong national government. It was decided that the meetings during the Constitutional Convention would be kept secret, so delegates could feel free to speak their minds without fear of outside interference. Guards were posted at the doors and all the windows were closed. The men swore not to speak of the meetings with anyone but the other delegates. Not everyone agreed with the secrecy. Some believed the discussion should be open to the public, but others believed that if word got out they were doing more than just fixing the articles, they would never be allowed to create a stronger government. Compromise means to settle differences by each side making concessions or giving in a little to come to a solution that solves the problem. It took a lot of give and take to come to agreement on the new Constitution. The three biggest compromises had to do with representation and slavery. The three main compromises: the Great Compromise, the Three-Fifths Compromise, and the Slave Trade Compromise. The Great Compromise. A major debate at the convention was over how to set up Congress, or the legislative branch of the government. It became a battle between the smaller states and the larger states. Several states submitted plans for the type of legislature they wanted. The Virginia plan, introduced by Edmund Randolph and James Madison, wanted the legislative branch to have two houses. Both houses would assign representatives based on wealth and population. The New Jersey plan, introduced by William Paterson, wanted the legislative branch to have only one house. Each state would have only one vote. The Great Compromise. The Great Compromise, proposed by Roger Sherman, took up a little from both plans and agreed on setting up the legislature with two houses. The House of Representatives would be based on population. Each state would get one representative for each 650,000 people living in the state, originally one for every 40,000. The Senate would be based on equality. Each state, no matter how small or large, would have two senators. The Great Compromise, in summary, answered the question of representation. It set up a bicameral or two-house legislature. In the House of Representatives, each state would send representatives based on their population. In the Senate, each state sends two representatives. The results: the House favors states with larger populations. The Senate favors those with a smaller population. The Three-Fifths Compromise. Southerners wanted to count slaves towards representation in Congress, but not for taxes. Northerners realized that this would allow the South to dominate or control Congress. Northerners argued that slaves were not free and therefore could not be counted toward representation but should count for taxes. A compromise was reached. 3 out of every 5 slaves would be counted for the purpose of representation and taxes. The Slave Trade Compromise. The North worried that the South would control Congress simply by importing more slaves. The North wanted to end the slave trade. The South wanted to maintain the slave trade. A limit on the importation of slaves was agreed upon. Slaves could continue to be imported into the U.S. until 1808. Each imported slave would have a $10 tax levied upon the transaction. In exchange for the delay in ending the import of slaves, the South agreed to let the national government end the slave trade in 1808. Compromise again means to settle differences by each side making concessions to come to a solution that solves the problem. During the making of the U.S. Constitution, it took a lot of give and take to come to an agreement, and the 3 biggest compromises again were the Great Compromise, the 3/5 Compromise, and the Slave Trade Compromise. The Constitutional Convention, in summary, replaced the Articles of Confederation. It created the new Constitution. It separated government into 3 branches, a legislative, executive, and judicial branch. They compromised on representation. They compromised on counting slaves in the population, and they compromised about the slave trade. Note that even with so much attention to slavery, the words slave and slavery are not mentioned in the Constitution. The delegates knew that slavery was a controversial topic, so they avoided mentioning it by name. The U.S. Constitution, written in 1787, and the main author was James Madison. It was ratified in 1789. So ratify means to approve. It divided the government into 3 branches. George Washington became the first president of the United States. The U.S. Constitution can be amended, and there are 27 amendments. The U.S. Constitution contains the Bill of Rights, which is the first 10 amendments, and the Bill of Rights is a list of individual rights protected by the government, and the U.S. Constitution is the oldest working constitution in the world.